Good morning, everybody. Usually, if I'm traveling on a Sunday, there's not much good on the right-wing talk radio. A lot of sports stuff and other stuff I'm not that interested in. Some kind of dumb tech shows. So I find myself trying to find out, well, what does the other side think? And I listen to NPR because I like to be aware and educated and open-minded. So they were talking about how climate change is affecting the hurricane season this year, as well as the forest fires that are affecting the western part of this country and spanning, between California and Oregon. And we pray for all the people there and all the property there to be spared from this. But yet they have to recognize something. It's their fault, these forest fires. Now, I don't know about hurricanes, but the forest fire is a simple thing. For a long time, you had two things when it came to forest fires. You had natural fires that were allowed to burn. And the truth is, there are certain types of trees that only grow after burning. There are certain types of seeds in the trees that will only pop out of the seed pods at the temperatures of burning. And so forest fire was part of the natural ecosystem. We think about Smokey the Bear and only you can prevent forest fires. Excuse me. In a way, that's kind of propaganda, because the truth is the forest fires are a natural part of the ecosystem. And so trying to prevent all forest fires is really kind of a foolish thing. However, there was a recognition that maybe we could understand how to handle this, which was a bit of hubris. And so there were controlled burns, and the controlled burns were problematic as well, meaning the first problem was, when there would be a small fire, the firefighters would come and put out the fire. And so that had a negative effect on the ecosystem. There were certain trees that could not germinate, and there were certain birds that their habitat was ruined by not having burned. And so the lack of forest fires had a negative impact on the ecosystem. So then at a certain point, they started to have the controlled burns. Now, there were sometimes people even got killed with these controlled burns. There were other issues with the controlled burns. But it was there, and it was still keeping the necessary aspects of the ecosystem moving with the burns. But now the environmentalists said we have to stop the small fires when they come out, and we are not allowed to do controlled burns, even though they should know, if they know a little bit of biology and ecology, that the forest fires are a necessary aspect of this ecosystem. And so they just prevented all fires and didn't make any controlled burns. and that left big forests of dead trees that should have been wiped out either with small natural fires or with properly managed controlled burns. But for several years, neither was going on in these areas. And that turned this forest into a kindling box. The ganze Sache, it was ripe for this type of a horrible thing to happen because they were not getting rid of the dead trees. And they were not cutting down trees for lumber. All these things that people are thinking that they're doing to help the ecosystem really were not helping the ecosystem. They're causing these big, massive fires that are catastrophic. Now, the bigger issue, though, here is if you're concerned about man-made global warming, or climate change, they call it now. This way they can cover their bases, whether it gets hot or cold or whatever happens. They have a catch-all term. It's climate change. And of course, we all know that climate change happens all throughout history. It's a natural part of not only the prehistoric geology, but in our own historic times, the climate has changed at different points in history. And generally, the biggest catalyst for climate change would be natural phenomena, whether it be sunspots or volcanic activity and other things like that have a much bigger effect than all of the cars in the world on the global climate. Meaning the issues of air quality and so forth could have impact on a large swath of land. But on the global level, it's these massive events, whether they be extraterrestrial events. I don't mean aliens, I mean off of Earth, like a sunspot, or whether they be geological events and other terrestrial phenomena, like volcanic activity, that have always had an effect on our climate. So here, you have in California and in Oregon these big fires. It's not that the climate change from our cars and trucks and our cows is what caused these fires. There's no causation, not even a correlation between these fires and greenhouse gases. What there is that if there is some sort of a man-made greenhouse effect that will cause climate change, is going to be a much bigger effect from these fires, which could have been prevented if not for the foolish and hubris, the foolishness and hubris of these environmentalists by preventing the natural forest fires and preventing the controlled fires and the logging industry from doing a responsible conservationist approach to stewarding the land. Rather, they took a no hands on deck approach, and this approach is what has caused these fires, because there's so much dead trees and things in the forest, and thus they are responsible, not that the climate change is causing these fires, but just the opposite. The fires, if anything, is going to cause a climate change issue. It's going to be a much bigger problem from these fires than from any of our cars and trucks or factories or methane from cows and so forth. And so they should make, like we say in Hebrew, a cheshbon nefesh, they should make a calculation to try to figure out why do they think that they are so strong. They should learn a lesson from this. That you can't control everything. Just like they're arguing that we should not be, cutting down trees or making controlled fires and so forth. It's an issue the other way as well. That thinking that you, as human beings, are smarter than the intelligent design that's inherent in our ecosystem by preventing the fires, and also the failure to recognize that there is a safe and responsible approach to taking natural resources by doing so in an ethical way. Just like for centuries the native peoples did here. I know that a lot of the environmentalists have a tremendous respect for the Native American peoples, right? Well, the truth is the native people approached the usage of natural resources in an ethical manner. They recognized that human needs were valuable, and so they would approach it often somewhat in a ritualistic way, recognizing that there is something that we need, whether it's to fall a tree to make a house. They would have the log houses and so forth in certain Native American communities. They would go hunting, but they would do so in a way that had a mindful ritual that recognized not to take too much and to use what you take in an ethical way and in a mindful way. And by combining these ideas, they were able to have a sustainable approach to natural resources. And they recognized that the human beings were part of the greater ecosystem. The difference is that a lot of people from the environmentalist approach who feel that human life is a plague upon the earth. They don't recognize humanity as being valuable. This ideology comes from an atheistic point of view. Why do I say that? Because Newton taught the laws of thermodynamics. And one of the laws of thermodynamics, I don't remember if it's the second or third law of thermodynamics. I'm sorry, it's been a while since I was in high school. But I remember one of the laws of thermodynamics is entropy. Entropy means that a system of energy loses energy and loses complexity and loses order as time goes on, unless an outside force applies it. So an example of entropy would be if you just leave your house and don't do home improvement projects to maintain the house will eventually fall apart, become worse and worse. The roads, we see that every now and then you're driving and there's road work to pave the roads and so forth, because it's a law of thermodynamics of entropy. And this is the difference between a theistic worldview and an atheistic worldview in regard to life and the complexity of life and the diversity of life in the world. The theistic worldview would see that there's an intelligent creator who is pretty much making sure that entropy is not happening. Meaning that we say that that in order to fight entropy, there needs to be an outside source, an outside force that fights against that flow of entropy. And so we who believe in our scriptures and other religions who have their own traditions recognize a creator or some sort of a force that fights against this entropy. And so that's how we can explain the apparent evolution of biological life on this planet that seems to be observed in the world, that we see more complex life forms forming over time, which is a phenomenon that it seems to have been observed based on the evidence that we have. But there's a problem. It's not just in a simplistic way that evolution is a theory and the laws of thermodynamics are laws, and so the law of entropy is a law. And so in a simplistic way, you would say that a law trumps a theory. And so we know, we can prove that entropy is true, and yet in the concept of how we would simplistically look at the theory of evolution, we would say, no, this is merely a theory. And so the law of entropy would necessarily trump the theory of evolution. But that's not exactly true. We do see clear evidence of some sort of an evolutionary process. We can't say exactly how it happens, but we do see enough evidence of this theory of evolution, even if we don't understand exactly how it's being done. We see that there is an origin of speciation, that we have these different life forms that appear to be going from simple life forms to more complex life forms. We could argue on different aspects of this evidence, which I would agree to as well, that some of the evidence has been falsified and other aspects of evidence are flimsy and could be refuted. But still, in general, we have this general idea of the more simple life forms being followed historically by more life forms that appear to be more simple being followed by life forms that appear to be more complex. It's not exactly so. But in any event, Scripture also seems to point to such a thing, right? The Judeo-Christian, the Abrahamic tradition sees humanity as a certain pinnacle and zenith of the process of creation that went through what would appear to be a process of, in a certain way, more simple life forms being followed, even if it's not clear whether they are created independently or one gives rise to the next. But in any event, we have this idea of humanity being the pinnacle of this process. Certainly in the Abrahamic tradition, whether it's the Judeo-Christian tradition or the Islamic tradition or other traditions that come out of these traditions, there's a general idea that there's something about humanity, that there's a goal in creation leading to the human race. And although we can recognize that there is still within our community entropy, that's certainly an idea that we find in human society, in the Jewish tradition, that there is a societal entropy, perhaps quite the opposite of social Darwinism, that there is actually a societal entropy, the concept of Yeridas Hadoros, which is something that the Orthodox Jewish world widely embraces, and we tell the story of Rabbi Kamenetsky on the airplane saying that, the secularist, his grandchildren, will see him as being 2 generations closer to the monkeys, or the common ancestor with the other primates, at the very least, and the Orthodox grandchild will see his grandfather as being 2 generations closer to Mount Sinai, or closer to creation, to Adam and Eve, which were not seen as primitives, but as superlatives, almost angelic beings in the Jewish tradition before the fall. And so we who believe in God as not only the first cause, but as the constant provider of divine providence throughout history. So all that being said, we're losing out. We thereby recognize that we have a vital aspect of this world. So as the Bible says, that we are appointed to be stewards on this earth, la'avdei l'shamroi, that we're put here to work the land and to protect the land. And so we have responsibilities as human beings. But that we are a positive and superlative force in creation. The atheistic worldview would necessarily have to recognize, and I've seen science fiction authors look at it this way, that essentially, there's biological life that takes part in the entropy process, particularly bacteria and fungi that are involved in the decomposition of matter, of biological matter in the world. And so contributing to entropy. And the atheist would thereby have to say that all life is entropy, all life is destructive, and that these things that appear to be more advanced are actually more destructive and to be done away with. And so the atheist ethic would have to, if intellectually honest and recognizing science and the laws of thermodynamics, would essentially have to be anti-humanist. And so the secular humanist is taking a leap of faith that's ascientific, which they're entitled to do. And they're entitled to be intellectually dishonest. I have no problem with it, because I agree with that essential conclusion of humanism, that human beings are valuable and should be respected, and that there is a concept of human rights. That the atheist who is intellectually honest cannot be a humanist, because if you view the world through the lens of entropy and see no outside force as being capable, because there had to be something before humankind came upon this earth that brought about humankind. And even if it was an alien that came from another planet, where did that alien come from? If you believe in humanism, you have to reject the idea that human beings are essentially a product of entropy and therefore negative. Again, not necessarily negative in the sense, because but a destructive force in the world. And we would have to necessarily say, if we rejected an intelligent designer of some form, that we are essentially creatures of we are the worst bacteria, the worst fungus, the worst rot the universe ever saw. If we see ourselves as being in any way more advanced than them, and having accomplished this advancement without an intelligent designer, so by the laws of thermodynamics, we must be the worst, the most destructive, albeit we recognize the value of those things as well, of the bacteria and the fungi. But at certain times we see it necessary to try to remove and try to defeat these germs. And so is that what we are? Are the worst type of germs? That is the essential atheist idea if one is intellectually honest. However, if one recognizes a value in humanism, the secular humanism doesn't make sense. It has to be a theistic humanism. It has to be a recognition that the Creator made us for a purpose. And so therefore, that is the difference here. It's the hubris because the religious view would recognize that God is in control. And the secular view would say that we are in control. Thank you for, and we're being taught a lesson that we're not. Thank you for watching. God bless. Please lecture and subscribe, comment. See you later.